Back everyone, the iPhone 13 Pro Max just officially came out, so let's go and take a look at it against the iPhone XS Max camera and see which specific camera may be the better one for you. Now obviously the iPhone 13 Pro Max one is the better one in pretty much every single area. I would highly recommend picking that one up over the XS Max. They both have a little bit of a different camera setup. The iPhone XS Max has a wide and a telephoto camera, where the iPhone 13 Pro Max has a wide telephoto and an ultra-wide sensor, so you do get an additional ultra-wide sensor on that camera, but you also get 4K at 60 on the back of both of these, but the XS Max can only do 1080p at 60 on the front. The 13 Pro Max can actually do 4K at 60 on the front. So pretty big difference between them. You're getting, I guess, more video resolutions you can film in. On the 13 Pro Max, you're getting things like ProRes, ProRAW. You do get portrait mode on both, but you do not get cinematic mode on the iPhone XS Max, which is portrait mode for video, which is a really cool feature between both. So between that's pretty much the main differences. Now, the iPhone 13 Pro Max photos will be on the right, the XS Max photos will be on the left. Both of them were tap to focus and everything like that. Now, first of all, I'm already seeing some pretty big differences. It does seem like the background is much more blurred out on the 13 Pro Max than on the XS Max, and it really is a pretty big difference. So if I zoom in on both, so if I zoom in here and I zoom in here, not only can you tell that there's a pretty big difference, I think, with this little bulb that's in the middle, it does look like it's fairly, I guess, like colored out or more popping in color on the 13 Pro Max. You can see that the XS Max and the 13 Pro Max did pretty well with this little flower here, but I do think it looks a little bit better on the 13 Pro Max. But that background is definitely much more blurred out on the iPhone 13 Pro Max, which is really cool. You want the subject to be in focus here, and you want everything else to be blurred out in the background. So with this first photo, I'm already seeing some pretty big differences, which is really awesome. I want there to be big differences here, and between the 3 years that's between these two phones, at least with this one, there's a pretty big difference. Now with the next photo, I don't know if it's going to be a really big difference or not, but again, I kind of get the sense that, with the 13 Pro Max photo, it does look a little bit more blurred out in the background. I tapped to focus right in the center, and it does look like the 13 Pro Max did a little bit of a better job. Now, between this one, I don't really tell that big of a difference. They both kind of look like the same thing. If we go ahead and zoom into like this little area right here, definitely looks more in focus on the 13 Pro Max than on the iPhone XS Max right here. It looks a little bit more, I guess, blurred out. If you go and look at like the top right here, look at the top right here, definitely looks to be, at least in my opinion, that the background is a lot more blurred out on the 13 Pro Max, which is really cool, and the subject is more in focus. So between this photo, I would definitely give it again to the iPhone 13 Pro Max. Now the next one, not really a crazy big difference between these two, but you are able to see a little bit of a difference. So with they almost look like the exact same photo. So when you zoom in here, I mean, I kind of think that there's about the same exact thing going on. I really don't think there's that big of a difference when it comes down to it. You can see that they both did a kind of the same thing with this, I guess, like the overexposure right there. The background right here looks pretty much the same too. The colors may be looking a little bit more like red on the iPhone 13 Pro Max, but both of them are very similar here. I don't really think there's that ginormous of a difference between these two phones. Now with the next photo, I actually went into some of the worst lighting conditions I could find, and I just took the photo there. And here I could definitely tell that there's quite a bit of difference. So with the iPhone 13 Pro Max, you can kind of see that there's a lot more, I don't know the best word to describe it, but there's a lot more, I guess, popping of color on the iPhone 13 Pro Max and a lot less noise on that photo compared to the iPhone XS Max. So with the XS Max, I think it looks good. I really don't think it looks all that bad, but you can definitely tell that there's a lot more yellowing going on with the iPhone XS Max, which is not a problem in my opinion. Now, if I look at the bottom corner right here, which is something I've been doing, you can see again a little bit of a difference here. The color looks a lot more cooler and a lot less noisy. And if you even look at the flower petals, it looks a lot more sharper and a lot less grainy compared to the iPhone XS Max, which looks a lot more yellow. You can see like every little popping thing that pops out, but also there's just so much more noise going around that it just doesn't really make too much sense to me. Like the iPhone 13 Pro Max here is definitely the better photo. We don't even have to look at all the other aspects of this photo either. Now next up, we do have this little photo, which I guess there was more sunlight coming in for the XS Max photo. If you look at the brick, I mean, it's pretty much the same thing, but again, there was a little bit more darkening on the iPhone XS, on the 13 Pro Max. So that may be because, due to the lighting or something. But one thing I want to direct your attention to is this little thing right here. So I must have been focusing in on the wrong area on the iPhone 13 Pro Max, but funny enough, in this specific case, you can kind of see that the XS Max did a better job. This probably is due to the photo lighting and all that stuff with the sunlight coming in, but even at this photo, even though this isn't even focused in, there is still less noise on the iPhone 13 Pro Max photo, at least like there's a little bit of noise like right here, but there's less noise on the iPhone 10 on the 13 Pro Max photo than on the 10s Max, which is very interesting. I was expecting it to be the opposite. So even though this one is a little blurred out, you are getting, I guess, less noise on this photo as well. And if I focused in on the same spot between them, I'm sure it would have been pretty much the same thing. So this photo is probably more my fault. Now this one, nothing crazy. I just took it of like the curtains or whatever, and I didn't really notice anything crazy here, so we'll just go ahead and skip this one. Now this next photo is very interesting because the iPhone 13 Pro Max had that macro mode, and because of that, I couldn't turn it off when I went into this comparison. But the 13 Pro Max, for some reason, I have no idea why, would not focus in on that specific little stem thing that was coming out. It just wouldn't, and it really bothered me. There was really nothing I could do about it. I wish it did focus in on it because it would have been really cool, and it would have been a really good comparison. This is one of my favorite photos, and the lighting condition and everything. Now, I think if it did focus in on it, we would have had a much better, photo-looking photo on it or whatever. But you can see that one thing I've been seeing with the 13 Pro Max is that the coloring looks a lot more darker on the 13 Pro Max. The 10s Max looks a lot more lighter, and the colors, I think, look a little more popping, which is really interesting. So when you're looking at this type of photo, I think, in my opinion, you're definitely getting overall a better photo on the iPhone 13 Pro Max now because Apple actually enabled that macro mode to turn off and everything. But with the 10s Max, I think it still looked really good, and in this case, because it didn't even have that macro mode thing to start off with, you're really not going to be missing out on too much here, which is really, really interesting. Now this next photo was portrait mode between both, and what's very interesting is they both support portrait mode for animals, at least that's what it kind of looks like. And for some reason, again, the 10s Max photo looks a lot more popping in color because of the sunlight, probably. The 10s Max does something very funny. It just kind of overexposes most of the time, but sometimes it can look really good too. With the iPhone 13 Pro Max, you can see that the colors look a lot more even. There's not really one area where it's like, oh my God, there's a lot more sunlight here. But one thing I'm kind of saying that if you kind of look at the very top right there, if you look at the very top right here, you can see that again the background is, I think, much more blurred out on the iPhone 13 Pro Max. You can see that the iPhone 10s Max kind of kept this in focus, with the 13 Pro Max kind of actually blur that out, which is exactly what you want. If you look at the bottom, even like this little area looks a little bit more in focus compared to the 13 Pro Max, but the 13 Pro Max also kind of has it here too. So I think you're getting a much more blurred out effect and a much more accurate blur from the iPhone 13 Pro Max. But the 10s Max photo doesn't even look that bad either. I actually do think they both look really good. Now this next photo, I just wanted to demonstrate the camera lenses that they have. So this is both cameras as soon as you boot them up on their wide angle lenses. So both look pretty good. Now next up, we do have the photo zoomed in all the way. So pretty much exactly the same thing for the most part. They both have telephoto lenses. It kind of looks like the 13 Pro Max was able to zoom in a little bit more. Now this next photo was them zoomed out all of the way. So you can see, I don't know why my 10s Max photos keeps going like that, but the 13 Pro Max was able to zoom out a lot more than the iPhone 10s Max. I mean, you have that ultra wide sensor there, so even though you're in the same area, look at how much more of a photo you can get on the iPhone 13 Pro Max than on the iPhone 10s Max. That is a pretty big difference here. So that is one of the bigger capabilities and one of the biggest assets of picking up an iPhone 13 Pro Max, is because you have that additional camera capability with that ultra wide sensor. Now finally, I took this pretty basic photo. It wasn't anything super crazy, it was just of this deck. And if I go and swipe to the back, which is one thing I've been kind of seeing over and over again, is that you can see that there's a lot less noise on the iPhone 13 Pro Max photos. Now nobody's going to be zooming in this much, but it is kind of interesting to see that this is one area where I've been seeing time and time again with the 13 Pro Max series is doing a much better job. The 13 series in general does a great job at reducing the noise that's in the background of photos. So a lot more noise in this little background here. The 10s Max, you can kind of see what's going on, but the rest of the photo looks pretty good. I kind of looked at the textures and everything, and that's a pretty big asset between both these photos. But you can see that right here with this specific coloring, the color of the deck looks a lot better, I think, on the iPhone 10s Max, which is so funny, than the iPhone 13 Pro Max, but they both look good and you can't really complain about either one of these photos. So ultimately, what I can tell you is that the iPhone 13 Pro Max, in my opinion, is a much better camera setup here. It is far better than you may think, and I really do think that the iPhone 13 Pro Max is a much better camera than the iPhone 10s Max. And this is, again, something I've been seeing time and time again, and it is one of my favorite aspects of this specific device. It's definitely not perfect, but it gets the job done, and I'm actually really happy about it. Now with the iPhone 10s Max, I still think that's a great iPhone as well. You can't really go wrong with it, and I do think both are great. I would probably recommend picking up something like the iPhone 13 Pro Max, or at the very least an 11 Pro Max, but both cameras are good, and I'm really happy with the 13 Pro Max this time around. So in terms of that, that pretty much covers it up. If you guys have any other questions or anything like that, let me know in the comment section below. Hit the like button, that would mean so much, but definitely hit that subscribe button. More importantly than everything else, I love every single one of you guys. Hopefully I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace out till then.